So Apple has two big problems, the US and China, or I guess you could say the relationship between the US and China. Because I don't know if you knew, but Apple makes the iPhone. And Apple sells the most iPhones in America, but they pretty much make most of them in China. They make some of them in India. Apple did diversify their manufacturing line because of things related to trade wars with China. Apple saw the writing on the wall that the US and China were not going to have great relations very soon, so they started diversifying and building stuff in India. But this trade war is a big problem for Apple because tariffs mean that Apple has to pay more to import their phones, which means their phones become more expensive. And I'm sure Apple would like to still sell their phones, so them going up in cost is not good for them, especially when that cost is no benefit to them at all. Like if the US tariffs China and the iPhone doubles in cost, for example, Apple's not getting a piece of that pie. That's pretty much all going directly to the US government out of your pocket. Because remember, tariffs are a tax on you. If a company has to pay money to import goods into the country, the cost of the goods will reflect that import cost. If it costs Apple an extra $1,000 to import an iPhone into America, they're going to raise the price by at least $1,000, probably more. Tariffs are meant to be used as a tool to boost local manufacturing. Just slapping 100% tariffs on whatever you want literally only hurts the economy. It makes everyone uncertain of the country, and people who would have bought things but aren't going to since the price went up also hurt the economy. The way the tariffs have been implemented under the Trump administration is nothing short of brain dead. Like for example, US Steel. We've had a tariff on steel for a very long time because we need to manufacture steel domestically, even though manufacturing it domestically doesn't make sense from a cost perspective. It is much cheaper to get steel from Mexico than it is to make it in the US. But we have deemed steel to be a critical resource that we need to be able to manufacture at all points in time, which is true, by the way. Steel is one of those things where you can't have a modern civilization without steel. It is extremely important. But tariffs are meant to basically be used to maintain an industry, not to tax things willy-nilly. Especially since the only way a tariff works is if people believe they're going to stay. Because if Apple, for example, doesn't believe the tariff is going to stay, they're not going to build anything in the US. Because why would they build anything to manufacture anything in the US where labor is more expensive if they think the tariffs will blow over within a couple years or months or weeks under this administration? But this back and forth between the US and China is definitely putting Apple in a rough spot because they pretty much make most of their phones in China, and the US is like the biggest market for the iPhone. If you go to China, no one's really using an iPhone. If you go anywhere but the US, most people don't really just use iPhone. The US is kind of weird where we all have iPhones here. This is a very important market for Apple because they have such a large market share in this country. And if they have to raise the cost of the iPhone way above what they planned, that could put their whole thing in jeopardy. So to appease Donald Trump, Tim Apple went with a bunch of other tech bros to talk about how much they'd invest in the country. I'm sure you saw this. Apple pledged to invest $500 billion into US manufacturing, which just like probably isn't going to happen. There is nothing backing this $500 billion number, and I'm pretty sure Trump has already added hundreds of billions of dollars on top of it for no reason. There is no agreement between the US and Apple to actually build factories. It is just a pledge from Apple to invest $500 billion. Nothing will come of this. I will genuinely be shocked if Apple builds a factory here because there is no incentive for them to do so, even though they said they would. They are just lying to Trump's face because it is very easy to do and he just believes you. Or Donald Trump just knows they're all lying to his face, which is kind of crazy. He just lets all that slide because he's lied to a lot. But realistically, all the tech CEOs at this event knew whatever number they said, they weren't actually gonna do. Like there was even a point within this meeting where Mark Zuckerberg got caught in a private conversation where he basically asked Trump like, hey, was that number high enough? Like they are just making up these numbers and throwing them out in the wind. There is no actual plan in place. None of these companies are going to invest any amount of money into American manufacturing. The only reason Trump did a meeting like this is to get headlines. Like that is the only realistic thing I could see from this because there is no investment being made by any of these companies. Like if Apple was truly planning to invest $500 billion into American manufacturing, they would be like, here are the plans for our new plant, guys. And they have not done that. So realistically, all these tech CEOs are just doing this to be in Trump's good graces, which is also understandable. Like I don't like how any of these people are bending the knee, but I understand their position. And it's the obvious thing any of these people would do, because to go against a big administration like this, you have to have a spine, which none of them have. And Trump has already shown that if you don't play ball, he will go after you in whatever way he possibly can. Now, is he successful in doing that? Oftentimes, he's actually not. So if you are going against Trump for whatever reason, you should probably just not listen to him, because he, more often than not, cannot do anything once you tell him no. But people don't do that because it's probably just easier to say, here's $10 billion, leave me alone. But all this placating towards Trump's ego does line up somewhere, okay? Because Apple has recently announced that they're also going to keep investing large amounts of money into China. Now, Apple is trying to play nice with both the US and China, and I don't really see how this is going to work. Apple is currently walking the tightrope towards pissing off either country. And if Apple pisses off either country, that's a big problem for Apple, because they rely on both countries very heavily. And Apple even announcing they're investing in China could be a problem for Apple. Like, Donald Trump clearly does not care about following the law or like principle or whatever. And if he perceives what Apple is doing as being crossed, he will probably retaliate in some way, shape, or form that could hurt Apple. Like, for example, not excluding iPhones from any tariffs, or charging a specific tariff for certain phones. Like, there are definitely ways that Trump could punish Apple that Apple would not like, which is why they're playing ball to begin with. I think Tim Cook recognizes this administration is a little bit off their rocker and is just trying to avoid really pissing them off. And the funny thing about Apple saying they'd invest in China is that they've already been doing it for like over 10 years. They've been putting in at least $55 billion a year into China's economy. In fact, Apple has invested so much money into China that without that investment, it is arguable that modern China might not exist as it is today. Like, they could be significantly poorer. That is how much money Apple has dumped into that country. Like, Apple single-handedly massively improved the Chinese economy with their investment. And you might be thinking, what was the point of all that investment, and why don't they do it in the US? Well, the point was cheap labor, which is why they're not doing it in the US, because there's no cheap labor here. Basically, Apple needed somewhere to manufacture the iPhone for cheap, and they picked China and invested billions upon billions of dollars into building factories there and training workers there and all of that kind of stuff. Apple has significantly invested in China. And that also means that in this current trade war, I think Apple just cares way more about maintaining good relations with China than the US. Both markets are important to Apple, do not get me wrong. Like, Apple does need a place to sell their phones, but more importantly, they need a place to manufacture the phones. And China is just a better option. And also, if you're the CEO of Apple, I'm sure this trade war is not like a good thing for you. Like, I'm sure Tim Cook looks at this country right now and thinks, man, this sucks. Like, I don't think he wants to deal with constantly changing geopolitical tensions and also just like random price increases from tariffs. Like, this is not a good environment to be operating a business, and it's just frankly like stupid and short-sighted. And it's not like I think that without these tariffs, Apple would be investing in the US or something. I don't think that's true at all. I just think we'd be in a much better spot if we could actually, focus on real economic problems and not just increase tariffs randomly and really just go for headline. I think we'd just be in a much better spot overall if this administration wasn't causing companies like Apple to look overseas into investing in other countries even more than they already are. Because if you're Tim Cook, you're looking at the US right now as a problem child. Like, it is almost not worth the hassle to deal with this administration. There is no consistency on like anything at all, and everything they do is only for PR win. Like, the whole thing with Tim Cook investing $500 billion in the US, it's never going to happen. They literally had that meeting to make news article headlines. That is the only reason. And then meanwhile, Apple dumps money into China for real. But for Apple, currently what it comes down to is just appeasing this current administration and investing in China to continue business as usual as best as possible. Because if Donald Trump does see Apple investing in China and doesn't like it, he will probably retaliate. But that is the current predicament Apple is in. They want to invest in China, but doing so could piss off the eye of Sauron. But what do you think? Leave in the comments down below, like and subscribe to you, and click the entries down, check out more of my content, and have a good one.